Okay, welcome back, everybody. We have an absolute legend on the podcast today. He is one of the GOATs. He was on the original season one back when I was doing the podcast initially. We have Dr. Creatine, as he's known on Instagram, Dr. Scott Forbes. Thank you very much. We finally got you on the podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a challenge to book me in. Not because of my side. I think you're too busy, but yeah, I got loads of time. And anytime you want to talk about creatine, just let me know.
Yeah, you're an absolute champ. I've been the worst. I was gonna say it's not on your fault. You send me a bunch of dates and I just keep getting called in for these events. So you've been so flexible. And Scott, you're always up for these podcasts, even though a quick search on Spotify, if you type in Scott Forbes, there is a list of podcasts, and I feel like you get the same questions in most of them. Um, I just think you're a champ and you calmly answer all of them as if it's your first time answering them. So hopefully we won't belabor too many of them today. I want to explore some new areas, but for those listening, we went through a huge in-depth podcast where Scott answered pretty much every single question you've ever had on creatine in season one. So definitely go back to listen to that episode first. Today we're going to go a bit deeper, some interesting questions, and I want to hear about some updates because I feel like on Instagram, every day on your story, you're in a new study being published. So it's been exploding recently, has it, Scott?
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years. But yeah, we've been successful with quite a few different reviews, looking at the benefits of creatine across a variety of different populations, but also the impact of creatine on a variety of different tissues as well. So
Mm.
beyond just muscle, but we can also obviously talk about the impact on muscle as well.
What would you say is the most intriguing line of research, kind of looking at new applications of creatine currently?
Yeah, I'd say looking at the benefits of creatine on brain health or brain function
Mm.
is definitely an emerging area that's really interesting. And then Dr. Darren Kando has been researching the benefits of creatine on bone health as well. And they just published, it just got accepted, a 2-year training study with almost 240 postmenopausal females, and
Wow.
half of them got creatine, half of them got placebo, and they looked at bone strength with a couple markers. So they used bone mineral density as one. Actually, found no effect on bone mineral density, but they found improvements in bone geometry, so the shape of the bone, and that's actually a better predictor of bone
Mm.
strength than bone mineral density. So there
Okay.
is some improvements in multiple kind of markers of bone geometry that they showed in the creatine group compared to the placebo group. So there's some really
Wow.
cool research coming out in that area.
That's awesome. Okay, very interesting. And is it fair to say until now, there has been a bias towards studying males in creatine research, or is that starting to kind of level off?
No, that's very true. Most of the studies have been done on males. Very few studies have looked at females alone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an area that's starting to shift for sure. And Abby Smith Ryan is one of the researchers that studied, creatine across the menstrual phase, for example, or the menstrual cycle, looking at either the luteal phase or the follicular phase. And she found some differences with regards to water retention in those two different phases. So definitely watch her work because she's studying a lot of these dietary supplements in a female population. She's the best in the world. But yeah, we've done a few studies looking at just creatine supplementation on female population. And then Darren Kando is also leading the way, particularly in older females and postmenopausal females, looking at the
Mm,
benefits of creatine.
that's awesome. So I was telling you off air before we went live that I feel like I've been listening to you all day over the past few days. I listened to a bunch of your podcasts, and I had heard them already, but you were on the Fight Dietitian's podcast, and he made a point that, and it was a great point, that creatine, you know, 10, 15 years ago when I was in school, it was this steroid, it was this stigmatized synthetic chemical or hormone that people take. Um, And it's now, there's a lot of information about it now, and people are generally accepting it, you know. When I know when I ask groups that I present to, what is the most studied effective supplement that we know of, usually a lot of them will say creatine. So, and then you responded to, in that podcast, you said you're welcome, because that is in thanks to a lot of the research that you guys have been doing. So have you seen general acceptance of creatine as the research is coming out?
I think it's shifting in that direction for sure. There's still a lot of people that are fearful of creatine. They think it's
Yeah.
going to cause kidney dysfunction, baldness, um, that it's going to harm your body in a variety of different ways. Yeah, that it's basically a steroid. Yeah, there's just kind of lots of fears associated with it. So I think it's still out there that people think that creatine is bad for you. But that shift is definitely happening. So a lot of people are understanding the research, and maybe because of podcasts like yourself that are really giving the evidence-based information and telling people, what are the benefits of creatine, and that it's actually a safe supplement to use. And yeah, from there they can educate themselves, and then that shift starts to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, the podcasts like this, we're just the messengers. You guys are champs for being willing to come on. I think in the academic community, um, it's amazing when you see someone so deep in the research, always willing to like connect and bridge that gap and go out into the real world and just voice what's going on in the research you're going through. It's amazing. So, you know, we need more of that. We need more of that. Um,
Yeah,
okay.
for sure.
Yeah.
Um, if you actually look at our academic papers, I think there's about 15 people in the world that actually reads them. So yeah, it's important, I think, to connect. And obviously through social media and things like that, we've been successful, I think, at getting out the message of kind of the benefits of creatine.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So I told Scott I wouldn't annoy him with all the questions, the typical questions he gets. However, I did put a question box on my story. I think it was yesterday, and I got all the typical ones. I got the baldness one. I got the water retention one. Literally the cliche questions. So if you do have those questions and you want a really in-depth answer, definitely go back to episode 1. I'm sure we're going to touch on some of them, but first, before we dive into the quick hitters, what is your vision for creatine? And you made a really good point on a previous podcast, the We Do Science podcast, that there's a certain amount you can gain with creatine. It doesn't supersede, obviously, sleep and getting enough calories and eating regularly and hitting your protein target. So what do you see your vision for creatine being in just the general landscape?
Yeah, so I took this analogy from Darren Candow, so shout out to him. But I see it as like if you want to be healthy and have good performance, um, the analogy is building a cake. So if you need a good foundation, so that foundation is sleep, regular exercise, and just good nutrition. So eating lots of whole foods, lots of fruits and vegetables. And the icing on the cake is like getting sufficient protein, looking at macronutrients, um, could be nutrient timing, and then really the sprinkles on the cake, which are important and makes the cake better, is creatine. So there
Mm.
is evidence that it does work, it does help, but you need all those other things to really make a good cake or to be healthy. And so I think those are things that we need to keep in the back of our mind.
Wow. And you could pull that a bit further and say, for some people, the sprinkles are really important, and for others, maybe less important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a true statement as well.
Awesome. Great. I love analogies. I really do. Okay. So let's dive into some of the quick hitters. Main mechanisms of action of like the benefits to be gained from creatine. When I hear groups ask me about creatine, what are the main things to be gained? Middle-aged, younger people, they're active, not necessarily elite athletes, but what are some of the ways that it can exert its benefits?
Yeah, so the way it works within, for example, a muscle cell is that it increases what's known as phosphocreatine,
Mhm.
and that particular molecule, it can be broken down into energy very quickly. So it supports high intensity exercise. So
Hmm.
anytime you're doing like lifting weights or running really fast, sprinting upstairs, you're going to be utilizing that particular energy system. So if you supplement with creatine, you can make that energy system about 20 to 40% bigger. So it just increases the capacity of that energy system. It allows you to train a little bit harder. But it does a lot of other things in the muscle as well. It brings in, if you ingest it with carbohydrates, it actually brings in more carbohydrates into the muscle, so it can help with glycogen resynthesis. It also increases anabolic hormones like IGF-1. It causes a little bit of water retention during that loading phase, which causes some cell swelling, which is actually a good thing. It stimulates the muscle to grow. So there's a variety of other kind of mechanisms of how creatine could actually enhance muscle health and muscle performance. I'd say that main one is just increasing that phosphocreatine, that particular energy system.
Yeah. And to just dive into a small piece on that. So the water retention piece, then we usually break it down to people that it's water uptake in the cell, and that in itself is an anabolic process. Can you just really quickly, I heard you talking about the proliferation of satellite cells in the recovery process. So how does water uptake in the cell actually induce muscle gain? How is that an anabolic process?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And there's a great study by Mark Tarnopolsky, he's a medical doctor, but also a really big actually creatine researcher, exercise scientist. I think he's published like, I don't know, 400 peer-reviewed articles. So
Is he bald?
he's no, he's not. He actually
Okay, there you
has some
go.
hair, yeah. So but yeah, he's a great guy. And they did a study where they loaded individuals with creatine for 7 days, and they looked at osmosensing molecules.
Mm,
So that's associated with cell swelling and an increase in water retention within the muscle. And that stimulated things like myogenic regulatory factors, which then activate satellite cells. And satellite cells, when they're activated, they turn into myonuclei. So a muscle itself is myonucleated. So it has multiple nuclei within a muscle cell. And for the muscle to grow, it needs to increase the number of nuclei first. And one mechanism is actually through that cell swelling and with creatine to activate myogenic regulatory factors, satellite cells, increase nuclei, increase the capacity for the muscle to grow. So that's actually a good thing. And basically, to summarize it, is that creatine actually stimulates the muscle to grow through that water retention.
mm, awesome. Wow, that's a great breakdown. So, I say something to the lines of what you just said, obviously a lot simpler to the people I talk to. And I was just in a fire department today, Scott, just before we hopped on this podcast, giving a talk, and creatine came up. And this guy said, okay, but whatever, it's in the muscle cell, but I just feel heavy and bloated. So what would you kind of respond to that when people give you that feedback? Is it maybe just not for them? Do some people, are they imagining some of that? Or what do you think?
So there is some evidence, at least over the short term during that loading phase, that you might also increase some extracellular water as well.
Mm,
But most of it is actually the intracellular water. So you might feel a little bit heavier, might gain 1 to 2% of your body mass even within a week. So
mm,
my recommendation for that individual might be to try a lower dose of creatine. Just take 3 grams per day, and we know that it might take a little bit longer to saturate your muscles, but you might not feel as bloated or as heavy compared to doing that loading phase.
yeah.
Um, and there's lots of benefits to having a little bit more water within the muscle. It's going to stimulate the muscle to grow, but it also might be a benefit for exercising in the hot environment as well. So that'd be a great importance for a firefighter to possibly take creatine.
Yeah.
And I know there's actually some research that's either started or in the process of getting started at Texas A&M with Dr. Rick Kreider and his one of his graduate students, Drew Gonzalez, who's going to look at the benefits of creatine in firefighters. So hopefully
Ooh,
we can get some of that research out relatively soon and give that to that firefighter to show some of the benefits.
yeah. Yeah, so if you guys are listening, I told them all about the podcast. I said, make sure you tune into this podcast because I'm having the creatine guy on. So if you're listening, there you go. Yeah, and there needs to be more research in those populations because they are absolutely athletes. You know, I stand in front of these guys and gals and I tell them they're athletes and they laugh at me. And it's like, no, no, no. At any point in time, you can be asked to exert maximum amounts of effort, you know, for hours and hours. You can be asked to climb 50 flights of stairs. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's definitely performance nutrition. That has to be their focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think for firefighters, it's actually the perfect supplement.
Yeah.
One, it can help you exercise in the hot environment. It can help you do those bursts of, uh, of activity where you have to run upstairs or do something really, really challenging.
Hmm.
We also know that exercise or creatine could be a benefit when to your brain when you have mental fatigue or during sleep deprivation as well. So I feel like firefighters check the box on all those things. You
All
know,
of
they do
those things.
really intense exercise, they're sleep deprived, they have a lot of mental fatigue, and they're exercising in a hot environment. Creatine would be of benefit in all those situations.
Boom. Wow. And if you're not a firefighter listening to this, I'm sure some of those things apply to you as well. That is very, very insightful. Awesome. Okay, I
Yeah.
will quote you on that. Um, okay, so just lastly on the water retention piece, you highlighted a really cool study by, I believe it was Brad Schoenfeld, looking at a longer term, not longer term study, but a study over several weeks where they actually measured the ratio of intracellular water to lean mass. And they found that after, you know, several weeks of supplementing and training, there was no difference. So this idea that like it's fake muscle, it's just water, it's just swollen muscle wasn't in fact true, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So it was actually, yeah, an 8-week training
8 weeks.
study. It was done by a group in Brazil, but Brad Schoenfeld was a co-author on that paper. And yeah, the ratio of intracellular water to skeletal muscle mass remained the same from the start of the study to at the end of the 8 weeks. So intracellular water went up, but that stimulated the muscle to grow. And so at the end, they had more muscle in the creatine group, but that ratio was actually the exact same at the end of the study. And I think that's a really important study to show that, it's not just filling your muscles with tons of water and not
Yeah.
actually stimulating the muscle to grow. You're actually getting bigger muscles when you take creatine.
Yeah. Yeah. For anyone watching on YouTube, you can see that Scott is passionate about that. He's he needs to get that message out there. It's important because I actually got about 5 people saying that today. They were like, it's just swollen muscle. It's just water absorbed in the cell. I was like, okay, okay. Um, all right. So one thing I've heard just anecdotally now, I've never actually really looked into this, but I've actually gotten it about 3 or 4 times. Headaches. And these people swore that it was creatine supplementation that was giving them headaches. And I said, are you sure it's not just there's some other factor? How is your sleep? What is your diet looking like? Is there any link there between headaches and creatine supplementation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I was recently writing a paper with Dr. Darren Cando looking at some of the benefits of creatine on brain health.
Hmm.
And I know he was reading some research to show that creatine might actually reduce headaches.
There we go.
So I need to find that. I need to read that literature. I haven't read it yet, but yeah, there could be some benefits to actually taking creatine for your brain and actually reducing, well, depression, anxiety, but maybe also headaches as well.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, awesome. So I now that I'm just thinking about it, I probably should have started with this, but again, this was information we covered, you know, exhaustively in the initial podcast. But creatine itself, you don't have to tell us what it is. I'm pretty sure everyone, you know, everyone knows what it is, but how much access or how much creatine do we get naturally from endogenous production, our diet, right? And then based on that, are there certain groups who prescribe to certain dietary approaches that creatine could be more beneficial for?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so creatine, first of all, it's a steroid. No, I'm joking. So it's not a steroid. It's made up of just 3 amino acids, and our body, as you mentioned, can synthesize its own creatine. primarily in the liver and kidneys, but also in our brains as well. But our bodies can produce about 1 gram of creatine per day. So that's how much creatine is being synthesized within our body. And then we can get creatine from food sources, primarily animal based. So things like red meat, seafood, herring, salmon. But we can also get it from milk or chicken as well. So we can get some other benefits of or we can get creatine from our food as well.
That's my fault.
Um,
Scott just got a notification that the meeting was going to end. That's my bad.
Yeah, no worries. So you can get some creatine from those food sources, and it depends on kind of how much you would be consuming those particular foods.
Mm,
But to get 5 grams of creatine from salmon, for example, which contains a high amount of creatine, you'd actually have to consume about 2.5 pounds of salmon. So it's
wow.
very challenging to get a lot of creatine in your diet. And so commercially available supplements. And so even if you eat those animal products that contain a high amount of creatine, you tend to get about a 20% increase in the amount of creatine within your muscles after supplementation. If you're a
Mm,
vegetarian and you don't eat uh, chicken, red meat, or seafood, then you tend to get about a 30 to 40% increase in the amount of creatine in your muscles following supplementation. So that's
wow.
why I think this supplement has been so effective is almost everyone responds to creatine and it's so hard to get in your actual diet.
Wow. That's very, very interesting. So there you have it, guys. If you are, you're a plant-based eater, that it might have a special benefit for you. You might, consider that. Okay. On the piece of responding, and we'll go for a couple more minutes and then I'll flick this off. Non-responders, that's a big area, right? A lot of people are like, I think I'm a non-responder to creatine. You made a really good point. I can't remember what podcast it was on, but just because you're not responding in the conventional muscle gain or power domain, there might be other benefits of creatine because there's so many other lines of research going on now that you might be responding to and not noticing as much as the cliche ones of power and muscle mass. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. So you need to be careful with that term responder, non-responder, because it might just be the variables that were measured in that particular situation, and you might have missed it, some of the benefits
Mm-hmm.
of creatine. And we know that creatine can impact other tissues beyond just the muscles, so bone, your brain. So if a study is not measuring those things, then creatine could be having a positive effect on your other tissues in those situations. But just because it's not impacting your muscle is doesn't mean that you're a non-responder to creatine.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, lastly, um, just like last quick hitter question, creatinine. So I remember I went to get my blood tests before and I had higher levels of creatinine. And the doctor literally looked at me and he said, "You supplement with creatine?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, we're all good, so." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, what's that?" And he was like, "Well, it's just a byproduct of creatine breakdown, so we're not really worried." And is that in fact true?
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have, well, first, if you're supplementing with creatine, you might have elevated levels of creatinine. And then we also know that if you eat a lot of protein, um, and if you also have a large amount of muscle mass, your creatinine levels will be elevated as well. So all those things are going to influence creatinine. And so if they don't take those into consideration, they might say, "Oh, look, you have like you're at higher risk or you have kidney dysfunction," but it's kind of it's an error that the doctor is
Yeah.
making in those situations. So you can't use creatinine for somebody that has a lot of muscle mass, eats a lot of protein, and also is taking creatine.
Yeah. And Scott, is that the main reason that it gets associated or linked with kidney damage? Or was it based on just poor studies where there was some cases of kidney damage?
No, I would say that's the main kind of reason
Mm,
that has been linked to kidney damage because creatinine it's an easy blood marker to measure. Yeah, is generally a good indicator of kidney function or dysfunction. So if creatinine levels go up, then and you're not on creatine, you don't have a large amount of muscle mass, then that would be a good indicator of something going bad for your kidneys. But if you are taking creatine, you need to look at other markers. So there's cystatin C is probably a better marker in those situations to assess kidney function than creatinine levels are.
Gotcha. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so I'll end this. Do you have a couple more minutes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Sorry about that, man. I had no idea that I had a limit on this. I downgraded like 2 months ago because I'm not using Zoom for anything. But I thought it was unlimited time if it's 1-to-1. But I guess if I'm recording.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay, I'll send you another link in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Oh wait, yeah, I just need to make sure I have the